Let the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to you, Lord, mighty God. Amen. In the first reading, which is odd because we really haven't had first readings for quite some time. We've had a psalm and a gospel from Matthew. We don't have Matthew today. That's because this is a festival day, and on this day we follow the liturgical calendar more rigidly. And on this day of Pentecost, we celebrate God's gift. God's gift of His Spirit to the disciples. But not just to those people gathered in that room, but to all who heard them speak, to all who heard those who heard them speak, and it kept growing and growing and growing, that the Spirit that started out there continues to be alive in us this day. Now, in the reading from Acts, it says, it was the day of Pentecost in the very first line that was read, and the disciples were gathered together in one room. There hadn't been any gift of the Holy Spirit yet. How could it be Pentecost? Pentecost is the gift of the Spirit. I researched. I found something brand new to me. It's been around for generations, history, thousands and thousands of years. So, Pentecost was not just a Christian celebration. It was a Jewish celebration. The biggest feast in the Jewish liturgical year is Passover. Not Hanukkah, not the Day of Atonement, not New Year, Passover, freedom. From slavery to freedom through the Red Sea, that happened on a certain day. At a certain time, God intervened in the lives of the people of Israel, called them out of slavery to freedom. Then in the book of Leviticus, it said, I want you to wait a week of weeks. So 7 weeks times 7 days is 49. He said, add 1 day to that. On the 50th day, I want you to celebrate because something great happened then too. 50 days after Passover. On Passover, you were set free. On Pentecost, you were given the law. The 10 Commandments carved in the tablets, brought down by Moses. Shattered, he had to go back up for a second copy because the people had sinned and made the golden calf and all that. But still, the 10 Commandments were given to the people of the world, to the people of Israel, and through them to all the world on Pentecost. So that's why so many people were gathered in Jerusalem that day to celebrate their Pentecost, to celebrate the God's gift of God's commandments to all the world. So the disciples were gathered together to celebrate Pentecost, 50 days after Passover, coincidentally, 50 days after the death and resurrection of Jesus. So our Pentecost is God's gift of the Spirit to those gathered in that room, to all who heard them, and continue to grow to this day. It is a good thing that they did not have freight trains in first century Israel. If they did, the reading would say, the disciples would gather together on Pentecost in the room, and it sounded like a freight train was coming by. Because earthquakes and mudslides and tornadoes and all big things sound like a freight train. It comes rumbling at you and it scares you. They didn't have that reference then, but we have it today. Anytime you see somebody interviewed after some natural disaster, it sounded like a freight train. Okay, that was the funny part, sorry. I'll take sympathy laugh, I'll take it. Okay. So, as the disciples are gathered in the room, God's Spirit comes into the room with them. The Spirit that activated and moved in Jesus in all of His miracles and all of His teaching and all of His life. In the Gospel of John that we just read, that happens on the day of Easter, where Jesus breathed on the disciples and said, you have my breath, my Spirit alive in you. Forgive sins, don't forgive sins. Do what the Spirit directs you. In the other 3 Gospels, not John, they wait the 50 days. However it happened, whatever day it happened, God's Spirit was given to the disciples. In the book of Acts, as they are gathered together in the upper room, a strong wind shakes everything, and everybody hears it. It wasn't something that just happened in that room. It was heard throughout the whole city. People came out to say, what's going on? The disciples did not remain in their room filled with God's Spirit. They went outside too, because driven by the Spirit, they went from where they were to where they needed to be. They went from what was comfortable, just us 11, because Judas was already gone, just us 11 sitting here waiting and praying and missing Jesus because he ascended on 40 days after Easter, on Ascension Thursday. So the disciples were gathered together. We are gathered together. God's Spirit was given to the disciples. God's Spirit has been given to all of us through baptism and confirmation. It's God's Spirit that consecrated the Eucharist that we're going to celebrate in a few moments. But we're not given God's Spirit to remain in this room, in this building. We are given God's Spirit for the same reason that the disciples were given it. To go out. To step out of our comfort zone, to step out of this building into that world out there. That world that is in desperate need of God's Spirit. Of forgiveness and peace and hope and life. Into a world filled with so much pain and suffering and loss and death. God's Spirit is given to us here. We are nourished with the bread of life, with the cup of salvation. That we might be stronger in God's Spirit to go out. And to go out not just saying, many churches have a big thing saying, we are a welcoming church. And that is a good thing to be. When people walk in our doors, we welcome them. We recognize them. We welcome them. We say, hey, thanks for coming. By the way, are there any visitors here today? Any new people? We welcome you. Thank you. There could be more visitors. And if we wait for people just to walk into our doors, it's going to be a while before we get a whole lot more. We must be driven by the Spirit of God to go out into the world and let people know in their languages. The disciples did not come out of the upper room and speak in Aramaic to the crowds. They spoke in Aramaic, they spoke in Latin, they spoke in Greek, they spoke Cretan, they spoke all these different languages so that all people could hear the message. So we must learn the language of the other people. The people that we meet day in and day out, we must learn their language. Not just English or French or German or whatever it is that they speak. But the language of their lives. We must learn it so that we can put the gospel, the good news of God's love, the good news of an opportunity for forgiveness, the good news of they too can have that Spirit within them that they observe within us. But they got to observe it within us first. They got to see that the way we act is different than the way that much of the world acts. We have been given a powerful gift, a gift of the Spirit of God. That Spirit of God is emblazoned on our tabernacle on its shiny new table, by the way. Did you notice? It's there. It's here. It's in this place. It's in you. It's in us gathered together as a community. But not just here. It must follow us. It must go with us that we might have people encounter God's Spirit in us, in what we say, in what we do, how we live. That they might say, what is it about you that's different? What is it about you that you don't get as upset as frequently about the things in the world? How can you have hope? How can you have faith? How can you have trust? And we can speak with them about it because God's Spirit's already here. God's Spirit was within us yesterday. God's Spirit will be within us tomorrow. And the work of God's Spirit is to transform each of us to more closely resemble Jesus Christ and His words and His work and His ministry. Yesterday we were not as much. Hopefully today we're a little bit more in that image and likeness, and tomorrow even more. God's Spirit is continually transforming us and the world. And He does it through us. That's our challenge, is to go out and find the people whose lives already brush up against ours in one way or another. at work, at play, on the golf course, on a really long bicycle ride, wherever we may be, God's Spirit is at work within us to meet them where they are. If we wait for them to come and wander in the doors, it may be a very, very long wait. But if we go out from here, like the disciples went out from the upper room, we can then show people. We can then love people. We can hear their stories and connect that with the work of God's Spirit. Then, through us, God's church will continue to grow. Not just by getting members from other denominations to come here rather than there, but by actually allowing God's Spirit to work within them, because it works within us. That's all.